clerk, I pay my entry fee.
All right, y'all, it's 5:30. I'm calling to order this workshop of the City Council of the City of Bandera. We're at 511 Main Street, Bandera, Texas, on Wednesday, August 10th, 2022. Councilman Hasty is present, Councilman Russ is present, and Mayor Pro Tem Rebecca Gibson is present. Our City Secretary is present. And we have Jonathan Tiefenteller and James Hilscher here from Ardura, our engineering firm. Okay. Item 2 is visitors to be heard. Anybody sign up?
No, ma'am.
Thank you. Item 3 is the workshop. Item 8 is presentation by Ardura about options for the wastewater treatment plant. Jonathan, James?
Awesome.
Is that good for everybody? Can the audience and everybody up there see it?
Can we keep it like this?
Good evening, council, and thank you for having us. Kind of wanted to give a background and introduce my colleague, Mr. James Hilscher. James is going to kind of walk us through this PowerPoint. Uh-oh. Did I kick
No,
it?
it's updating. It'll be okay. It's gonna be done in a minute. Continue your speech.
I practiced this. It's all thrown off.
Oh, no. I'm sorry.
Okay, for the record, Christine Morse arrived at 5:32. Jill, would you make a change on the attendance sheet, please?
Sure.
Not a problem. Our computer's updating.
The TV is updating.
So we're good. So anyways, we put together a PowerPoint presentation. We're here to talk about TLAP, Texas Land Application, or reuse water for zero discharge. Kind of want to give some background. Why are we doing this? Why are we here? I think we all know wastewater treatment plant's been a very hot topic. Very interested to see what that future looks like. Part of those investigations and relocating the wastewater treatment plant out of the floodway, the question became from council as a big picture, yes, we want to do this improvement, but a push that we were hearing from y'all and the council as the community is we would like to explore reuse, TLAP, zero discharge. What does that look like for Bandera?
Hold on, it's restarting now. It's gonna be okay.
We're still good?
Yep.
Can you
Okay.
please state the land application acronym TLAP that you're referencing? for me
Texas
and
Land
everyone.
Application Permit. And it's
Acquisition or application?
Application.
Application.
It's
That's it?
applying the water.
She was wrong, you were wrong.
No, I said, application. I did.
Yes, ma'am. And we're going to define,
You
and
said
so that's kind of what I was
acquisition.
getting into.
That's what I heard.
Is the purpose of this PowerPoint is to define what reuse water is, what TLAP is. We want to define what that is and then talk about what that looks like. Kind of the goal, and I've kind of repeated myself to some of the guys and members of council that I've already talked to, is the goal for this and me is to kind of put this project in perspective, and then as a community, as a team, with like-minded, seeing this as a goal, is how do we take actionable items and steps to making this a reality. And so that's kind of what I envision this being, is putting in perspective and defining what it is and how we got here and where we're going, if that makes sense. So with that, and with this lovely PowerPoint, I will let Mr. James Hilscher kind of take over, and we're going to walk through a couple things. And part of this, it's a workshop, right? So if there is something, please ask questions, or we can get all the way through the PowerPoint and then have an open conversation and discussion on what was discussed. So whatever is best. If there's something that you don't want to stop and ask as we go, that'd be fine. We can also fully get through the PowerPoint because we're going to kind of make a full circle on this PowerPoint and then kind of open up the floor and make this truly a workshop where we talk about these items and how do we take steps as a group, right? So just,
Okay, I'm sorry, y'all. We haven't turned these TVs on since the last time.
Since the last time we turned them on.
Yes, that's the last time we
Wow.
did a PowerPoint. Okay. Were you on HDMI 1?
I
Or
am
did
on
you go to
HDMI 1, I believe. That does look like the back of my computer.
It
No,
does?
that is not the PowerPoint. Yeah, it's,
Oh, you might want to unplug it and plug it back in when it flashes like that.
oh, test and turn off and turn back on. Trigger.
Speaking of, where would you like me to stand?
I don't
Oh, I guess
really
that's
care.
what we
You just kind of if you want.
We only have the finest technology here.
Yeah.
Try.
The microphone doesn't work, so you don't.
That's fine. I think I
Okay.
read it anyway.
So you're good over there.
Okay.
Let's try it.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. I'll say okay.
And council, I apologize, I didn't print off the PowerPoint. It will be sent out and everyone will have a copy of it if they would like to review it again or share it. If there's different conversations that y'all have privately, that will be available. And we kind of wanted this to kind of be a little bit more open as a conversation kind of dynamic.
I don't know what's happening with this TV, you might just have to go with that one, this one is.
Oh, oh.
So surreal.
Oh, we can watch Netflix.
Wow.
Does it have the option for me to share like a
Well, I just gotta make sure
wireless,
it's on the right.
wireless kind of screen share?
You sure you're on one?
Mm-hmm. That's on HDMI one.
Okay, well, I don't know what to tell you other than you might just have to go with this one.
Okay.
Uh,
Alright.
Unplug and plug in again one more
Coming
time.
up,
Try one more time.
Yeah.
Try one more
maybe
time.
not.
And then if, hopefully it
I'll
won't
wait.
do that. Okay, there we go.
Wow.
It's like hopefully it won't,
Let me unplug now, I'm unplugged, and then
Okay, I turned it off, so it shouldn't affect that one anymore.
plug back in here.
Council, I guess if that's gonna be on the TV, you're welcome to join us out here.
Yeah, okay.
It's easier for everyone.
Are you staying put?
Yeah, I think she's fine.
Okay.
I'll try and turn this off too.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Wherever you want.
Okay.
Sorry, Jill. I need the surface. James, chair.
James, there's nothing I can do about the flashing.
Alright, good evening, council. My name is James Helsher. I'm a professional engineer with Ardura. Thanks to my associate Jonathan Tieftiller for the introduction. Tonight I'm going to talk to you about zero discharge options at the City of Bandera wastewater treatment plant, the new facility yet to be constructed. So in this presentation I hope to discuss what zero discharge is, what Texas land application permits are, and then also go into other alternatives to full zero discharge, like what is referred to as TCQ 210 reclaimed water.
Say that again, I'm sorry.
TCQ, Texas Commission on Environmental
Right.
Quality, Rule 210 is what defines this, reclaimed water, and I'll get into it later. So the way wastewater is handled is it comes into your facility, it is treated to a cleanliness level as defined by your TCQ permit, and then you discharge it to any your body of water, usually a stream. This is governed by your Texas Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permit, your TPDES. The City of Bandera has a permit good till 2025. It was just recently renewed in 2020. The City of Bandera's wastewater treatment plant is shown here where it's located. It outfalls into Mud Creek behind the facility, and that feeds into the Medina River subsequently. Zero discharge is a phrase used to denote a system where no treated effluent is discharged from the plant into any body of water. There are only a few methods currently how this is obtained, and only this one that is currently permitted by the state of Texas, or at least it has a full write-up. It's called the Texas Land Application Permit. In this method, you would be taking your effluent, storing it, and applying it by method of irrigation to a plot of land. So you can see here, it would go through your wastewater treatment plant and then would be stored in a pond, either at the wastewater treatment plant or at whatever land you are to irrigate, and then that is called your dedicated disposal field, where you are dispersing the effluent. Important to note, to acquire a Texas land application permit, the city of Bandera has to own the land at which they will be applying their effluent. They also have to maintain and operate all this equipment and the harvesting of whatever it is you're irrigating. You have to control the flow. You cannot farm this out to somebody else on land that you do not own. TCEQ needs you to own the land and the means of operating it. So your capital expenditures for this, as you can imagine, are quite high. You need to buy land. You need to buy the irrigation equipment for that land. You need to buy land and build up your storage ponds. There's additional transfer pumping to get this to wherever your land is. If it's not immediately adjacent to your wastewater treatment plant, that is pipe in the ground and pumps at your plant moving that effluent.
Bear with us.
Sorry,
No worries.
I unplugged the other TV thinking this one would stop acting up. If
So
it-
while we're waiting on that,
Yes, sir.
I'll try not to interrupt you.
No worries.
I just wanna make sure I've got this straight. So any land we discharge that effluent on, the treated effluent, once again, it must be our land?
Yes, sir.
We couldn't, like, send it over to a golf course?
We,
No, that is something that we'll cover later when we're talking about
Okay.
reclaimed water.
So that's not.
Okay.
That's not TLAP.
that is not
Okay.
TLAP. And we'll talk about maybe like a middle ground between that, where there's kind of two options we're talking about. And I apologize for kind of fooling with this, but there's almost a credit, if you will. So we're kind of, that's why we're gonna go full circle with the presentation on what this looks like, what that looks like, what maybe a combination looks like.
Can you
I'll try
not
to show
airplay it to this TV?
That's what I was, does these TV allow that?
I don't know,
So
it's on there now.
the reason I'm covering this one first is when you say the word zero discharge, that's a different permit entirely than your Texas pollutant discharge permit that I discussed before. This assumes your wastewater treatment plant will or have the capability to discharge into a stream. You can apply for a Texas land application permit, but what that says to TCEQ is I have no intention of ever discharging to any body of water. I will only be utilizing it on land. Go to the next slide.
So,
Or a storage
Correct,
pond, yes,
correct.
well, I'll show you that.
well, controlled, right? With a TLAP permit, regardless if it's very wet or you have a lot of flow, with a TLAP permit, you are not allowed to then discharge into the river.
Right, there is
You
no
have-
opportunity
You
for
have
you to
that
do
storage pond, we're gonna talk about how that's kind of sized, and then how do we quantify how much land that looks like. So you have a storage facility, so it's most like, typically is a big pond, and that stores all the flow, right? And then you have the land that is pulling from that pond to irrigate. So we kind of talk about during drought conditions, during wet weather conditions, kind of some of those factors that go into sizing that pond. And it kind of plays in, which plays into land, right, ultimately.
Could you get the next slide?
Next slide.
I think we're good now.
So like he was talking about, TCQ Rule 309C is what sets the requirement for sizing all these aspects. You have to assume a certain number of things, like what crop it is that you are hoping to irrigate. So what water usage that crop would require. It also takes into account historical rainfall data. When you are sizing, you are using your wettest year. So we are assuming that at parts of the year your ground is super saturated and cannot accept any flow. If that flow is running off and going off into your streams, that counts as discharge. So you would have to build a storage pond large enough to handle that flow, which never stops coming from your wastewater treatment plant. It is always flowing. So you have to build a storage pond large enough to take that in when you are not able to disperse it onto the land.
Does that make sense, kind of what you're asking?
So requirements very similar to aerobic like residential aerobics, you can't have it, the discharge can't come into streams or even where it would
Yes, sir.
flow down into it. Okay.
Other requirements in this rule set are your land application site cannot be near a public well, but I believe you guys are all surface water, so I don't think there are any public wells near
Well
here.
water, well water.
And you also cannot be near a public stream, again, for fear of discharge. Next slide. So the assumptions I used when we were building out this preliminary sizing for Bandera, the crop to be irrigated would be grass crop, making hay to feed livestock. Grass crop has water usage requirements year-round, or at least you can. It has no singular growing season, like corn or something like that. It's also fairly low maintenance. We also had to design with knowledge of what the flow from the wastewater treatment plant is. Your average daily flow is about 150,000 gallons per day today. But the rule states,
Are you sure about that?
Yes, ma'am. I actually talked to Sergeant Public Works about it today.
Okay, because I toured the facility last week and they were pumping 90,000 a day.
That's
And-
right.
And he said on average, we usually do like 120.
That's right. So it's really close to about 150. Right now, as dry as it's
Overall.
been, you're much lower. On average, over the
Yes.
last 30 years, we pulled like last 5 years of data. On
Okay.
average, it is about 150.
Okay, well, it says current, not 5-year average, so that's why I questioned, because you said today.
right, understood.
Okay.
Well, this is the
Okay.
number we were going off of. And then you must also build in 20-year projections. So the 20-year projected population of City of Bandera, I did a correlation between that and flow, and I got about 183,000 gallons per day. And then we also made an assumption that this land that the city would require would be available and would also be within about a mile of pipe in the ground from the wastewater treatment facility. This is a bit of a large assumption, but we had to go with it
But
for.
from this is how we'll talk about the range when we're talking budgets, because there's certain assumptions that we make, a mile away, land, stuff like that, and that's what we'll get into with y'all is, these are assumptions that we can make, but it's all gonna be very dependent on where this land is located.
Right.
Which is we gotta start somewhere, right?
Mhm.
So,
So these are the numbers that came out of those calculations that we did. Acres to be irrigated would require about 54 acres. Storage required is about 96 acre feet. So if we assume a pond with a 10-foot wall depth, dig 5 feet down, build 5 feet up, and then a couple more feet for freeboard, you have about 9.5 acres of pond, storage ponds.
so does that make sense? Kind of like putting that in perspective? When you're sizing these, we call it a water balance. So we're talking about assumptions made, what kind of crop, how much we're watering, stuff like that. But you also take into account your natural resources, rainwater, or drought, and stuff like that. So you have to size this pond so big, and it's required because you would assume that it's your wettest year of record. Meaning that your ground is very saturated, you're not able to irrigate your crop, whatever that might be. Because it's already oversaturated, as we discussed, you can't oversaturate that ground, because then you run the risk of it would be counting as an illegal discharge on neighboring land, stuff like that.
So are we talking like, looking at all the numbers up there, are we talking like 66 acres
Yes, ma'am.
total?
Like I said, there at the bottom, I didn't get to it, but there we assumed an additional 2 acre storage pond either at the application site or at the wastewater treatment facility to help
Within a
balance.
Right. So correct, about 66 acres
Yes.
total.
Go ahead.
Man, I thought I couldn't math.
I think
How
you can
many
skip to
acres
the
do we have
next
at the
slide.
park?
So,
Three.
actually,
And that'll also
Thank you.
come up later.
It's over
That's
100. Or like
that's exactly
over
what we're talking about today.
Okay, I'll shut up.
No. This is what we were talking about earlier. This is what we want. This kind of conversation and like what we're game plan as a team. What does that look like for Bandera? That's exactly one of the points we want to bring up.
Can I ask a question about the requirement to use like the wettest possible
very wet year.
circumstances? Even though that is occurring the least frequently, why is it based on that calculation?
TCEQ always
No.
asks you to size for the worst case scenario.
It's,
In anything that they regulate, it's always based on the worst case scenario. So in this
So-
case,
nothing subject to a local environment or historical.
It's based on your historical rainfall data. It's just the wettest year in the past 20 years.
Unfortunately,
flood.
Yeah,
unfortunately,
but also a football
Which will
championship.
happen.
which
Also a
Probably
football
in 10.
championship.
I'm sorry, Rick?
Also a football championship.
Oh,
See if they'll throw that in.
okay.
it is the unfortunate requirement in this world where you design for a natural disaster or worst case scenario. For the same reason that your tall towers here, I know not in Bandera, you don't have any towers or skyscrapers, but these bigger buildings have to have like a seismic stuff, or like for like any earthquake stuff like that. You don't have any earthquakes in Bandera, but there are certain design requirements that you're legally required to follow.
So may
This worst case scenario.
I ask this, is it limited to just having all of the storage availability in one location, or can you split those ponds out between a couple
You
of
can
locations?
split the ponds. The configuration is variable.
Okay,
Sometimes you'll have 2 or 3 smaller ponds all grouped together. Sometimes you'll have, I don't know, 3 or 4 or 2 large ponds, and one will be here and one will be over there. But yeah, in that case, the transfer between those has to have what's the word I'm looking for? Like a backup. What's the?
Right.
It cannot go down.
Right.
Alternate.
Right. So the questions that you're asking, and what Jerry had brought up just a minute ago,
Redundant.
it is exactly what we're talking about on what are feasible action items for Bandera. Is how do we start on a small scale and work our way up? So these questions they're asking is exactly what we envision for Bandera. You're not going to go out and buy 66 acres right now. Done deal. Let's move on. But it could start off in a park. It could start off in this field. It could start off here. And so that's what we kind of want to talk about and really get everyone on the same page, is how do we approach this as a community and as a team, and what action items can we take?
Right. So when we're presented with, can we look at zero discharge options? This is what zero discharge we estimate could cost the community to implement at this stage, at this moment. If we were to try to go immediately into a TLAP fully, something like this might be what's required. Keep in mind, like we were talking about, the orientation or the layout of these storage ponds can be variable. Depending on what irrigation system you utilize, your transfer pumps and piping, we assumed a full mile of pipe. It could be less, it could be more. And then that 20,000 per acre is based upon a quick study I did where I just looked at what land was for sale in Bandera. And
I think, as we all know, it's kind of jumped up quite a bit, right? So these are part of these moving assumptions that we're talking about.
right, so that's why that big bold number is, it seems so evident, and but there's a wide expected range.
Yes, ma'am.
James, okay, so with this level of treatment of this effluent that's coming to be stored, we couldn't use it on City Park because it's not treated to that level 1 that it would have to be treated to for the humans, correct?
Well, so that kind of gets into what I wanted to go into next.
Well, let's
so
go
when
into that then.
when you guys tell us about, we want to look at our options for zero discharge, this is what comes out of it. But what I want to talk to you about is there's an approach you can do as a community to build up to something like zero discharge. TCEQ 210 lays out a process to reuse some of your wastewater in creative ways. They call it reclaimed water. It's commonly referred to as purple pipe. TCEQ requires that any pipe holding reclaimed or recycled non-potable water be purple to differentiate it from your water system. If you've ever been to San Antonio, the San Antonio water system has the largest reclaimed water distribution system in the nation. You can see it where it connects to the AT&T Center, where the Spurs play right there. They use it to irrigate the grass around the stadium.
It's impressive.
I can go into the whole lot of weird stuff San Antonio does, but I'll move on.
No thanks.
210 reclaimed water usage is unique from TLAP in that it does not require the city to own the land in which it is being utilized. You would still have a discharge permit. You would still likely be discharging. But you can add and offer your reclaimed water to private entities and customers around town to utilize your effluent to help reduce your flow. These can be
Sorry.
So, oh yeah, no, keep going. So these customers can be golf courses, farmers, private companies. And after 2 to 5 years of reclaimed water use by these customers, you can collect your data from what these customers utilized, and you can apply their usage as a credit towards an eventual TLAP application. So you can credit up to 50% of your effluent flows just by saying our 210 water use customers, or reclaimed water customers, utilize 50% of our effluent. So now instead of having to buy 66 acres, maybe you're having to buy 30-something acres. It has the potential to help make zero discharge much more attainable for you as a community.
So on the back end of a 210, they'll let you get the TLAP and use only some of it on your own land.
Yes, ma'am. And this is fairly new. This was adopted in
Tricky.
this was adopted in
Okay.
2020.
So-
Okay, and may I ask just real quick too, because when you talk about all of the potential uses for purple pipe and recording data and reducing your flow into the river, I don't think it's really fair or a whole picture to leave out the piece of how much less we're pumping out of the aquifer based on that, right? I mean, for a holistic
So-
picture
Right,
of
yeah. So
water as a
if
resource.
a number of the customers who connect to your reclaimed water system are actively using your water or actively
No,
using their
it's
own
all
wells,
out of the same aquifer though.
right, then
It's
you
all
are
relevant.
helping to offset that water
Yes.
usage.
Right.
Yes, which is a
If you go to the next slide, one of the things I wanted to note about purple pipe is since this, like we discussed before, jet flow is always coming. So I don't know if you guys are on watering restrictions right now. I'm only allowed to water my lawn once a week after 7
We
p.m.
can't, oh,
Okay.
no, we're on the 5.
People attached to your purple pipe water system, you can say would never go on watering restrictions. You want them to be using that water all the time. So it's a benefit to them as well as to you.
So,
I mean, car washes, football fields. I mean, can the
Exactly.
schools use it, or
Yes.
is there a restriction
so that was
for
kind of what the
school?
mayor was talking about. There are certain levels of treatment, and this is all, we were kind of talking about assumptions. I don't mean to go back on anyone full circle. This is all with the assumption that the wastewater treatment plant has been relocated out of the floodway and is treating to a type 1 reuse. Type 1 reuse means it's safe to irrigate next to where public and pedestrians are gonna be around. Type 2 reuse is only for agriculture and just like irrigating like a field. So that's like where public's
Right,
not
yeah.
gonna
But
be.
not produce, right?
It can be, so I have that listed at the
With
bottom
two,
here.
with
Okay.
two.
Potential, it could be local farmers with some limitation to crop selection. Generally, it's just anything that is skinned, cooked, cleaned, you're fine. If it's not, then it gets a little hairy. You can do it in the ground as long as it doesn't touch the product.
So it's like the levels of treatment. Part of this is the assumption, again, we relocated the wastewater treatment plant and we are treating to a type 1 reuse. Type 1 will give us the flexibility to irrigate a field or to irrigate a park. And so that's kind of what we envision.
Yes,
Are your restrictions still the same, such as you can't have runoff into a stream or?
No, you would still have a discharge permit, and your wastewater treatment plant would likely still be discharging some.
But I'm talking with your affluent, your treated
Oh, with your
affluent.
effluent, so the
can
people who are
at level
applying
one.
should be trying to keep it from running off. But it's kind of hazy on TCQ who, what's the word I'm looking for? Who tells them or who
It's like,
checks on
like
it.
regulating that.
Right, who's regulating that?
So if your neighbor has because it could be a purple pipe system to a residential house. Your neighbor has a purple pipe system, but you don't. Their sprinklers going into your yard. There's not necessarily a direct line for regulating, stuff like that. So purple pipe kind of like monitoring that and regulating it is a lot tougher.
Right.
Our water
So-
board's pretty tough around here.
Right, so you would
But
you would
it's not their
be
jurisdiction is what, it's only, TCEQ is the only authority over regulating this.
right, but they push off a lot of that type of stuff of like make sure your customers aren't overwatering so that it's running off all over the place, and that's kind of put on you to regulate them. You just have to educate your customers on these things.
Gotcha.
Right.
So if it just rained recently, don't run it, that kind of stuff. So in addition to the numbers we did before for the TLAP, we also said, okay, what if we were to present a 210 reclaim use system for Bandera? You guys talked to us about the city park as a potentially irrigatable land that you own. I was told it's about 20 acres, and so I did the math on that. If you laid an in-ground irrigation system for that full park that you could, there's like a 50-foot setback from any body of water you have to, so I took off some of that land. But it has the potential to reclaim up to about like 35% of your current effluent flow, even in the wettest year, like we did the math before. You would need to also put some amount of storage in place and distribution pumping and piping in place to start your purple pipe system. But the storage requirements are not TLAP requirements. You would be storing enough to service your reclaimed water customers. And that's just, that sizing is based on that. You're not trying to take all of it offline and all of it away from the stream. You know, like I said, you would probably still discharge some. Additionally, the city is allowed to sell this reclaimed water to the interested customers. Farmers, local people. You would probably have to build out a fee structure, but it would be much cheaper than your standard water. And then, on top of that, like I talked about, you wouldn't have watering restrictions on these things.
James,
Yes, ma'am.
so with this 210, we would still have to build a retention pond.
Yes, ma'am, but it would be much smaller.
Okay.
So if you go to the next slide.
So with the 210, you don't have that same worst case scenario build to?
Correct.
Correct, okay.
Correct. So what we're doing here, just kind of full circle, is we're giving like a feasible, how do we start this process? You can, and communities are doing it, actually just in y'all's backyard, they're doing 210 reuse. They still have a discharge permit, that's exactly right, and they have not used their discharge permit. But if they get a very large storm event or whatever, they still have that permit that they can discharge. Now they have enough local, like right next to their wastewater treatment plant, where they have fields that they can irrigate, and they're able to have enough land that they can irrigate all that they don't have to use their discharge. What we're talking about here is how does Bandera begin that process? We're saying right in your backyard, we can, with this spot of land, we can eliminate 35% of your effluent. And we find another piece of land, we eliminate another 35%. And so that's how we get to zero discharge on 210 reuse while still having a discharge permit. Because right now, it doesn't make sense, I think as we just talked about 10 minutes ago, it doesn't make sense, let's cut it off, no discharge permit, we're going TLAP. All right, well I need 66 acres of land, a really big retention pond, and all this other stuff that we don't have the infrastructure for. So what we're talking about with the 210 is this is the step, this is how you eliminate 35%. We'll work together as a team, and if the city does want to go TLAP, going back a few slides, we can credit up to 50% 210 reuse, 50% of your effluent flow. So the city, if they go TLAP, they will get rid of their discharge, which then you would require what we're talking about of having that big pond, worst case scenario, wet weather, and all that stuff like that. Does that kind of make sense? Everyone?
May I ask one quick question about TLAP and either whether that's on the front end or the post purple pipe project? The city owns the land. Can we lease the land to a farmer who's growing
Yes.
hay? Okay.
Yes, you are the owner of the land, you are responsible for maintaining it.
Or whatever it may be.
If that responsibility looks like leasing it to a local farmer to come plow that field and take care of it, that would now be, you would be held responsible by TCEQ to make sure that is done. But you could, that farmer, y'all would have y'all's own separate agreement, but at the end of the day, the city would be held responsible. Right. That makes sense.
But just to clarify, if we found enough takers on this extra water above 35%, we could discharge it 100% as far
Right,
as.
there's potential that you would never utilize your discharge permit, much like.
Purple pipe
And
is all.
that's
Right.
what Blanco's doing, just gets,
They're
you're familiar with what they're doing there. Blanco has a discharge permit that discharges into their river, but they have not actually used that discharge pipe because they have enough local farmers that are taking all their water.
Right, but then it's semantics. You wouldn't be recognized by the state as a zero discharge place because you don't have a TLAP. You would still have an active discharge permit, but if you never utilized it, ostensibly you
The
are.
goal is the same
Right.
Right,
in the end.
yes.
Right.
So on the next slide,
It's the
we
intention and
put together some numbers.
reality of it that matters.
based on, again, wild assumptions, putting in an in-ground irrigation system for that full 16 to 20 acres at the park. An in-ground irrigation system costs a lot more than an agricultural irrigation system, by the way. Your purple pipe pumping and distribution, again, is determined maybe about a mile. Maybe it has to bore under the river. There's a lot of variables there. Maybe it doesn't have to do that. And then the storage. The storage is actually a lot smaller. I want to say, I size it to be about 2 acres, 10 foot tall. So, and then, yeah, so the range is a little bit smaller, and the total dollars is a little bit smaller as well. But that's also, again, assuming you're going to build out that full irrigation system at the park today.
And-
just,
Oh, go ahead, Jerry.
Is there anything to stop us from using above-ground irrigation, such as rainbirds or whatever, to disperse that effluent?
No, but it's at a park, so we're assuming there's going to be a lot of public use and public exposure. So you would like it to, I don't know, yeah, I assumed in-ground just because that would be the least obtrusive.
Okay. Well, we could use that option, or at least on part of it even.
It could be an option,
What's
so you
different
just wanna
from
control
irrigation?
that you're not like, have a jet shooting into the river, right?
Right.
You would, in ground, you can kinda control the flow, it's not like running off that
Sure.
illegal discharge that we're talking about.
I
That would be
gotcha.
the only thing, so in ground would be like worst case scenario, we know we have control of it.
Well, and like with these places with public exposure, like in San Antonio, I was looking over their presentation to their reclaimed water customers. They suggest you only water at night to, keep it away from potential to,
Give them more time to soak in.
right, give them more time to soak in and not hit people actively.
So I mean, all of this, and as y'all know, because we've been talking about it for a while the water would be treated to a type 1 reuse, which is safe by TCEQ to be around public, it's still public perception. As we all know, a lot of what we talk about every day is education and what that looks like and what it means. And so I think San Antonio a lot of times will often try to go in ground, just they can kind of avoid that. People aren't, they're putting wastewater in my park, that's not necessarily what's happening. In this world, right, we deal with that every day.
Right.
It is public education.
Right. Yes, ma'am.
I have a few questions here.
Mhm.
So with this estimate, the purple pipe pumping and distribution, what is the proximity to the wastewater treatment plant of that estimate?
Again, we assumed about a mile to
About a
run.
mile.
Because we do not know where the wastewater treatment plant will be.
So right now, it's a lot
True, we
closer.
don't.
Right now, it's a lot closer, right?
Okay, you're right.
But we also don't wanna stay right where we're at, we wanna relocate that out
Yes,
far away.
of course. And then, reclaim water, okay. So this is the scenario here. Let's just say, for example, we had some other folks or property owners that could really use this for irrigation purposes. So then we would just have to factor those distances that conveyance
Right.
a purple pipe. If there were rainwater catchment systems,
Okay,
can you send the purple pipe water into a rainwater catchment system that's gonna be used for irrigation?
I don't see why not. I think that is like past the meter, which is kind of in an area past TCEQ's eyes.
Well,
They don't
because
really
for a
care what happens
community,
past that point. But as
um,
long as you're not gonna drink it, we're cool.
You would have to label that now as a purple pipe.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
And have to put a big old non-potable sticker on it,
Right.
well, do people have to do that with their rainwater catchment
Generally.
systems? Okay, and I guess the reason I ask that is because, well, it doesn't rain here that much, so when people do there are rainwater catchment systems here that sit empty a lot of the time.
So you're talking more like residential kind of
It could be.
purpose? Yeah,
Commercial.
no, that's a residential,
It could be
commercial, your biggest user, your school districts, those are great.
I was thinking of the ISD because they have this amazing rainwater catchment system that, I can't even explain it adequately, but it captures water from all of their parking areas,
That's right.
stores it and pumps the
That's right.
football fields, right?
That's right.
Did I explain it, okay? So, when those sit empty,
Perfect example.
perfect example.
Perfect example.
That's
Now,
amazing.
no, those are great examples, and those are very viable
And it's a
solutions.
smaller
Because like your
pond
school
though.
districts, when we're talking about that credit, your school district or anything like that are customers that are going to consistently use that water, so you're gonna have 2 to 5 years of consistent usage where you can get that credit towards TLAP. And those are the kind of customers you want, people that are gonna routinely use it and take that flow.
Except when we get a good rain.
You gotta get the infrastructure there.
Right.
That is the biggest thing when you start from the beginning on a city that's already built out, right?
And we don't necessarily have to convey it to them either. Like, we could always do water trucks, or they could pay for that themselves too.
Potentially.
They could
I
pull
have,
the
I have
water
to
in.
dig into that a
Yep.
little more. I think that's a potential option.
Well, it'd be great to.
As long as you're
look-
moving it and marking it non-potable and all
So
those
that's
kind of
the
things.
I see those
benefit.
trucks all the time.
That's the benefit of with 210, you still have your discharge into the creek.
Right.
If their truck doesn't get there in time or whatever, you still have that discharge permit. You have that safety net, if you will. Now, I know that's what we're trying to move away from, and I'm not trying to go back into the problem, but until you have a consistent client base where you know, and that's what TCEQ's big thing is, I need consistent data that this water is being pulled. And so that's kind of the benefit where 210 steps in, where you have a little bit of safety net until you get that system infrastructure put into place.
They're farmers or ranchers, they'll take it.
So the piece that, where we still have the discharge permit.
Yes.
That's not as horrifying to me, so long as we can not have a pipe that's dumping directly into the water, because there are ways to filter a lot of those nutrients out before it hits the water.
That's correct.
And so that's not the worst case scenario either. The more we can slow it, sink it, get it through root systems on its way down, slow it and sink it.
So if we can reduce the flow and treat to a higher level, maybe still having some flow discharge of the river isn't the worst case scenario. And then while we buy time to continue to expand this purple pipe infrastructure. Does that make sense? Are we on the same page?
Yeah. The exciting ideas of, you can offer this to new developers,
Exactly.
and entice them here, but that's a little far in the future because you have to build out this infrastructure first. Getting the purple pipe in the ground and throughout the city isn't gonna happen. It's gonna take a good amount of time.
But if, as a new development, potentially, if you're building a sewer line out to it,
Right, so let's
and a water
say,
line out to it, you can build a purple pipe out to it.
right, and so that's kind of why it's all very much big picture right now, and that's when we get to the end of this presentation, we'll probably go into the big spill of how do we pull this off as a community. But that's kind of like while we are relocating our wastewater treatment plant, let's say we relocate farther down 16 where there's a little bit more land for development to come in. When developments come in and now you have a purple pipe reuse system in place, you can extend that system to that development. There you go. You have a developer that would love to take that water and it's gonna be a consistent user from here on out. And so that's kind of what that future could look like.
How much, is there any distance, or how much distance of separation do you have to have between a purple pipe and white pipe?
That's a good question. I have it somewhere in the rules here, but I wanna say it's like 9 feet. It's similar to your wastewater.
Yeah, you can,
So, actually, you're not gonna be able to drop it in the same,
In
No,
the same
right.
trench
Well,
as
you
your
can't
water.
do water and
Same
wastewater
trench.
Oh,
on
But
there.
you can drop it near your wastewater. You can't drop it in the same trench as your water.
that's what I'm
It would
talking
be-
about. So,
yeah.
if, like residential, that's why I was thinking about that, if somebody's gonna put in a subdivision or something, you're still gonna have to pay the cost of digging two separate.
Well, if they
Well,
put in
you
a
have to
wastewater
anyway.
line, if you put in a wastewater line.
Oh, true, good point,
Yeah, and you're doing it at the same
Yeah.
time, so that
Right.
saves labor costs.
good point. You still got sewer lines. You gotta run
And
them.
you bring up a good point, this is all assuming on the new wastewater treatment facility, which we don't have a timeline on that, but these are all on today's dollars. So this, again, quite variable.
Quit bringing that up.
So, I
So,
just wanna say, I don't want you to hold us to this 6 years from now, but
Or even 30 days.
I'm not a contractor, so I
no,
won't
we
say that.
we wanted to start somewhere because the question was asked, well, what does that look like, right? And so we wanted to give an idea what that looks like, not to say, hey, let's go pull a bond on $6 million, let's do that today. But we wanted to show what could that look like for Bandera, what action steps could we take. Maybe the park is a good action item, that's a good first step we can take, and that could be feasible. It's just,
I mean, really, it's gonna boil down to where we get a piece of land. and then we evaluate
Correct.
what the realistic
Options
options
nearby.
are.
Like we were talking about Blanco, all of their application is done right next door to their facility.
Mhm.
There are farmers nearby who allowed them to build out irrigation on their land, and they utilize it right there. So they don't really have like a purple pipe system in place, but they utilize 210 reclaimed water by TCQ standards.
Maybe that might be a incentive for some of these to be willing to sell to us. We trade the affluent
Oh,
water to
yeah.
them to irrigate their crops.
I
They
wonder
give us a
if
piece
our
of
land
land.
acquisition firm thought of that.
Mhm.
Sorry.
So if you move
Yeah.
on.
Too soon, too soon.
Moving right along.
So to wrap up and summarize, TLAP, the city would no longer have a discharge permit and would not be allowed to discharge into any body of water. The city would have to own the land. There is a large storage requirement. That flow does not stop coming from your wastewater treatment facility, even when your ground is saturated. You have your testing and monitoring requirements. TCQ will be monitoring to make sure you do not discharge. And then there's the higher operation costs of having a whole irrigation system, all that land, and maintaining it.
So that, I mean, unless you can hire a farmer or they have that kind of agreement, your public works is doing that. You have the equipment cost of your public works department and the labor of that, unless you work out some kind of agreement and stuff like that, a lease.
Them goats
To
and
me, it's
cows.
almost like, why would you do TLAP? Unless
There-
you just
there
want
are-
the
there are certain-
prestige of saying that you
There
don't
are certain
discharge.
communities, so Marble Falls is actually zero discharge through TLAP, and they're one of the largest communities who does it, and it's because their community, their citizenry pushed so hard for it. And then there are a number of communities like east of Austin near what are called pristine streams, and they're not allowed to discharge into those streams, so a lot of them utilize TLAP. But a lot of those are out of necessity,
Yeah,
and I don't know if you guys have that necessity, but that's what drives people to push for this.
Well, But this is an additional cost on top of the 15 million we're looking to finance
Yes,
right
ma'am.
now for the,
This is
Plan.
after the
plan.
so
plan.
that's on top of all of that, so.
And then to review 210 reclaimed water, city
Yeah, we
would
have to
keep,
do something with it. We have to
the
do
city
something with the
would
water.
keep their discharge permit. The city park is a viable option to start out with, depending on where the facility is. The city does not own the irrigated land. There's minimal storage requirements. Your storage requirements are what you are going to use versus what you have to store. Minimal operating costs. Most of your mechanical elements, your pumps, your storage, are going to be at the wastewater treatment facility where your operators already are. And then this could help you move to a zero discharge eventually in a phased approach.
Cool.
Is that one 4 to 6?
So that pretty much sums up kind of what we were talking about today, and we just want to kind of, again, I don't want to repeat myself, but trying to put some of this stuff into perspective, and then want to have an open discussion as a group and as a team. How do we make steps towards this? From listening to y'all, it sounds like this is something the community is very interested in, something the council is definitely interested in, and so how do we take steps towards this? So we're working on the wastewater treatment plant. Well, please go ahead.
When you're done.
No, it's just, I was just going in circles.
Okay. So let's say we are just not able to add the extra cost at this point, but we want to leave that as a possibility for the future, so we want to go ahead and treat the water to a level 1. How does that change our $15 million?
So actually, and I was gonna get into that, we're kind of, as we wrap this up. As y'all know, we've spent a lot of this year applying for grants and chasing every avenue. We're still waiting on HMGP. We can talk about Texas Water Development Board, the scorings that just came out. Bandera scored in the top 18% out of 170 applicants, or 172 applicants. Bandera was ranked number 31 on like the priority list, so still fairly high. We don't know exactly what that means just yet. But anyway, so we're chasing funding for your wastewater treatment plant and relocating that whole process that we've been talking about. Part of that assumption and the funding and the budget that was factored into that was a plant that was treating to a type 1 reuse. And that was put into the engineering feasibility report that was submitted to the city and then resubmitted to TDM and all Texas Water Development Board was this is to relocate the plant and treat to a type 1 reuse. So that was part of that assumption that we were talking about today, is your plant is relocated and it's treating type 1 reuse, because that's what was budgeted during that process.
So the items that I showed there are items that I made the assumption probably weren't included in that, like storage and pumping and piping. Things on the back end of the plant
Right.
that may not have been assumed into that initial.
Sure. Question.
Yes, ma'am.
So let's say we can get 5 acres next year to build the original plant.
Mhm.
Does the pond, do all this have to be adjacent to, I know that, you know, conveyance, the price goes up,
Mhm.
but does TCEQ require that this stuff be on the same property? Or can we ship it 5 miles down the road? It's
For well, you want to utilize gravity as much as you can in plant design. So having it on the facility, having it at the property makes the most sense, because then you're gravity intoing this. But you can have a lift station at the back end of your facility where you're feeding into and then you're pumping out of. So it doesn't have to be at the facility, it's just usually at the facility.
So if we were gonna go with TLAP, that's a 10-acre pond, but we'd have to have,
So you can only go to TLAP once you have 10-acre pond and the 54 acres.
okay, so we're looking at,
You can't, you can't necessarily phase TLAP. I'm doing TLAP.
that's what I was trying to get at.
You
Can we
can't, and
phase
that's
it?
what we're talking about, where you can credit. You start with 210 reuse. You credit up to 50% goes towards your TLAP. So you build a customer base that is consistently pulling from your purple pipe system. You have good data. This is how much flow they're using. You take that to TCEQ and they say, okay, you no longer have to have a 10-acre pond and 54 acres. You can have a 5-acre pond and you can have whatever that might be.
Okay.
Thank you. So, does that kind of make sense?
Yes, that's where I was trying to go, could we?
Right. And that's kind of what that phased approach looks like. It also looks like, and that's why it kind of gets tricky, if you do 210 reuse all the way to 0 discharge, so you have purple pipe, you get rid of all your effluent, the city doesn't own any of the land, you can't then go to TCQ and say, I don't have any discharge, I have all these farmers taking all my flow, I want to go to TLAP. TCEQ is going to say, well, you can only credit up to 50%, even though you're using 100%. Is
In your
going away.
210.
Does that make sense?
You still
So
need
you don't
30
get to
acres.
clout.
So then that's what we're saying, kind of
Zero
goes to
discharge.
semantics.
Like-
Exactly, yes.
Now there are different, I don't mean to just blanket statements, say semantics, and that's the only difference. There are differences between two, that it just gets kind of a little bit far into the weeds, a little bit higher level than what we're trying to talk about today.
So we build the basic plant with 210 in mind, and we began looking for green money. I don't mean green money, but
Purple money.
environmental money
Right.
to make these changes.
Correct. And that's the benefit.
Or we might find them on the way, I mean, we
I'm
might
sa-
find
yeah,
them on the way, right?
Right.
And so that's kind of like part of like we scored high in our application when we're looking for the new plant. Because part of that on the application we submitted, the intent is for green use. We do not currently have the infrastructure. That's our intent. So out of like 20 points, they didn't give us all 20 because we're obviously not a green project. But that's the direction the city wants to go. We got like 5 or 10 points. If that
Yeah,
makes sense.
sure.
And so what about in future grant proposals, if we
It's gonna
factor that in?
Great. It'll
And
look really good.
get the 20 million and let's go.
It looks really good. I just can't give you that blanket confidence. You're good. They're going to write you a check. So
And we're still
I can't
waiting
give you that.
on IIJA on that rollout and
correct.
investment.
Correct. So that was through Texas Water Development Board. Right
Is it
now,
coming through? Oh, and that was the last
what you're
one.
talking about was through Texas Water Development Board. It was all together in one PIF. Right now, they just released the scoring. Actually, we need to sit down and with the grant writers, we have public comments to August 30th to review how we scored and all that. And everyone can look it up online. It's the Texas Water Development Board website, how we scored, and we'll provide public comments. And then they'll prioritize and tell us what projects are going to be funded.
So, just to clarify once again, it sounds like we need a minimum of 7.5 acres. Is that correct? Or did I figure that wrong? 7.5 if we're gonna do a 210, because you said we only need
Well, that's one.
Oh,
2.5 acre
If the
pond.
facility itself is 5
Correct.
acres and
Right.
then you want
Oh,
2
yes,
acres
sir.
of storage,
Yes.
your storage doesn't have to be a pond. It can be a tank, but usually
Well-
they suggest a pond just because
We have
on
issues
top
with
of that you have the open air and the evaporation
Evaporation.
helps take some of it away. So it's usually assumed a pond.
So ideally 10 acres, but we could probably get by with 7.5.
Sure.
Yeah, to answer your question, that storage, like you were saying, can be a tank. You would size that tank based off of how much flow your customers are taking. Because if you're gonna go into a long-term lease agreement with a farmer and say, hey, I'm gonna give you purple pipe water, well, you need to have that storage to give it to them. Just like we design your current potable water elevated in-ground storage tanks. You gotta design off of how much flow is going out. We'd do the exact same thing if we did a tank for the purple pipe.
But also the storage doesn't have to be at the facility, at the
Right.
plant.
Right.
Right, exactly. You could, your outfall can have some kind of junction box where you send over to a lift station and send it somewhere else in addition to dumping into the river.
So if you were going to use storage tanks instead of a
I
pond,
already did too, but he said the minimum acreage.
our discharge was 150,000 gallons
In a
per day.
hole, not
Uh,
together.
What size tank would you need?
I don't know, I don't know.
I
Just,
couldn't tell you. I mean, that's
gas?
that's the thing.
the
Like,
size-
it's 10,000 gallons. If you want to take out 10,000 gallons per day, and then how much are you utilizing on the other side? You know, I have the number
Yeah,
coming in.
'cause
I
it'll
don't have
just
the
keep
number
filling
coming
up.
out. Yeah. So
Okay.
Yeah, it would be how much flow are the farmers taking, I keep saying farmers, but the people that are pulling from the purple pipe, sorry, I don't mean to, anyways, it's the people who are pulling from the purple pipe, that's what you would size your tank for, until we know
Okay.
how much flow they're pulling, then we can't really size the tank. So you wanna have a big enough tank that you can invite and be able to make those commitments with long-term leases, but you don't wanna over-design until you have those kind of commitments.
Yeah,
Right,
yeah. Put in a 50,000
and so that
gallon
you could,
tank.
that's the whole thing, is you can expand your 210 purple pipe infrastructure
As you go.
as you grow. So we have a tank or a pond big enough to irrigate the park. And then someone down the street says, I really like that for the football field. And so then you can size. And so it's like the same thing that we do for potable water. We plan for growth, we plan for like heavy watering days, stuff like that. So it'll be in the same approach.
Okay.
So we need 20 million and we're ready to go.
That's it, just, you won't do that.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
Okay,
This has been
how
a
much
real
we're gonna charge.
education. Thank you
How much
guys
we're
so
gonna charge you to
much.
go to
Thank
the
you.
park.
This is really valuable.
Yep,
Oh,
thank you,
and-
thank you, thank you.
I have, Jonathan emailed me this presentation, and I can, good morning. I will be glad to get it to anybody who wants it, just pictures of the slides, but if you want the information, even you and the public, if you want anything, if you would just give Jill your email address, council, I of course know your email address, I'll be sending out to you, but, it's a lot to
Yeah.
absorb, but it's quite a project.
Yes, ma'am.
Sounds
I'm
good.
just wondering from the council, how far out can you go? Like how far out of the city limits can you go to find a new site?
As far as you're
Well,
willing
we
to
can
pay.
buy
And then
land,
we have to build.
convey it.
Yeah, as far
That's
as you're
the
willing to pay to
expensive
convey it.
That's the
So the one good thing maybe about that would be that wherever we bring that in or out to, those people could possibly get on
Yes.
city
Correct.
water or city sewer,
Correct.
possibly.
Yes.
City
Yes.
water, we could only take them through the ETJ. They can't get on city
Unless
water.
they
No,
want to
but
annex
they-
in.
Well, by being
I don't-
annexed, they could.
Well, but
Yeah,
even so,
if
you
they
could still
requested.
Right.
run the purple.
They could run the purple,
Right.
yeah,
And
but
I
that's not
do
being on city water.
If I'm not mistaken, the city can provide water service outside of the ETJ. In fact, I think some of our CCN is outside of the ETJ, which means we're obligated to.
So our CCN is not outside of the ETJ.
It's not, okay,
not.
thank you.
ETJ is half a mile outside city limits.
Yes, I know.
That is the
Yeah.
ETJ. Our CCN does not go that far.
It doesn't go that
No,
far,
ma'am.
okay.
But it would be the same way we approach development, is it's on the developer to extend utilities. So for to relocate the wastewater treatment plant, makes that, obviously the city would have to buy that land would be now the city's. and then any landowners that ask to be annexed into the city, it would be treated the same way. They would be responsible for extending that utility. So that'd be the nice part, is they would come to the city, say, hey, I wanna get on it, I just saw you relocated next to me, I wanna get on y'all's infrastructure. It'd be their responsibility to extend the utilities.
Thank you,
As
John.
part of like, you would treat like a subdivision,
Mhm.
something like that. Yes, that is all we had.
Jonathan.
I have a question.
Oh, sorry, yes.
So based on this information, and say we get grants, that's great. On top of this, will be like a revenue analysis? What time frame we might be able to recoup a lot of the money that's being spent?
I have a-
Get that rate of return, like who our customers might be, obviously you keep saying farmers, residents, basically has that been forethought, okay, where are we gonna get revenue analysis so we know how much we could be taking in once we do dive into this?
I have a pro forma on the Clean Water SRF project with Texas Water Development Board. $15 million wastewater plant project with about $4 million in forgiveness, so it's an $11 million pro forma, and it shows what, you know, the city's gonna have to come up with to pay for this project. And I'm meeting with the financial advisor next week and explain to him more of what we've talked about tonight, and do some sort of revenue projection, you know, just the guy crunches numbers and see what we can come up with so we all have an idea of where we are.
Yeah, to answer your question, yes, sir, it's typically done before we get these projects.
Sure.
Council, thank you all for having us. I know it's a Wednesday night outside the norm. Thank you all for being here and just letting us, being patient with us. It was a lot of information. I definitely don't want to leave and just say, okay, that's what it is, so see y'all later, kind of deal. But more of like a call to action. As you know, city engineer, as a team, as council members are definitely interested in this. It comes into how do we as a group make these steps? It's kind of like asking y'all for y'all's help now, maybe beginning some of these conversations, helping us set up meetings, if we can maybe help educate the Bandera ISD or someone that has a big field that they're struggling to find water because we're in a drought. Like, hey, this could be a good solution. You know, starting those kind of conversations, anything like that, using y'all's connections and resources here locally. Using the community is definitely something that we can't take on individually, but like with support, this is definitely like how we could phase this project to go into the future that y'all are looking for.
Thank you, Jonathan. James, it was good to meet you, and thank you for coming out to visit with us.
It was nice meeting you.
Jonathan, we're gonna need some Adura sock swag.
I can
I
do that.
mean, what the, how do you get Adura socks?
I just figured I'd come decked out as a company.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
I'm gonna show you my
Ardura
socks
socks?
because you won't leave me alone.
I already don't leave you alone,
I'm
sir.
not-
Okay, let's move on, council.
I want to see his socks.
Look at the socks.
Yeah.
Once again, thank you all very much.
Yes.
Been waiting for that
Item B.
info.
Item B is a discussion about the water contingency plan, or our ordinance 203. This ordinance was passed June the 8th of 2000. It's not clear, the trigger criteria doesn't make a bit of sense. It refers to the city wells in one spot, to the Spring Hills Water Management District, to all these different things. This piece of paper that I printed for y'all, Public Works has been getting readings on the wells. I don't believe they're accurate. They've ordered a second piece of equipment. The piece of equipment we have is 25 years old and cannot possibly be accurate when, you know, Indian Waters falls 100 feet. I mean, it's just not possible, especially since the Dallas Street is supporting the city right now. They've turned the PRVs on, and that's the one that's pumping. These measurements are made from ground level to the top of the water. 3 of these wells are in the same aquifer. And I just don't see how one can be at 208 feet and one at 400 feet. It just doesn't make any sense. Yes.
I assume the Mulberry Indian Waters and Middle Trinity is in the same?
No, we only have one well in the Middle Trinity.
Oh, okay.
70 feet in one day.
Where is that well?
It's right next door to the Dallas Street well.
Oh, that's the new one.
Well, that's odd.
What's in a different water,
And
level,
height,
yeah, whatever.
yeah.
Yeah, the elevation, but it just doesn't make any sense. But anyway, it's just me.
There's a lot of things that don't make sense about this situation, and I don't know how many meetings it's gonna take for us to get this right. I know we're just here to discuss and have some public input hopefully. The Spring Hills Water Management District, is the old name that, was either the River Authority or the Groundwater District, and then the two merged in our county to become one, and I don't remember what year that happened. But the fact that the triggers reference, so if you look at the stages.
What page are you on, please?
Yes, so I don't know if that's the packet page, the bottom number's 10.
Okay.
The triggering criteria for initiation and termination. Stage 1 doesn't make reference to any well level. It's a voluntary conservation, prescribed restrictions
Based on date.
based on, wait a second.
But it did, I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, that's okay. Stage 1, mild restrictions.
It does tell us in here somewhere, I think.
Not for
Rebecca.
stage 1.
I thought it did.
Requirements for initiation. Customers shall be requested to voluntarily conserve water and adhere to the prescribed restrictions on certain water uses defined later in this chapter. Definitions annually beginning on May 1 through September 30th. So this is just when our authority, the mayor, says it hasn't been raining much, we're in stage 1. It's kind of an arbitrary decision. There's no defined trigger except the request for a voluntary conservation measure. It's in stage 2 that it drastically jumps to a Dallas Street well level, static water level, being between 516 feet and 531 feet. So Jonathan, static water level, that's from the ground level to the top of the water, correct? So that's, if your well is 800 feet, 516 is a really severe drop that you would think would be way beyond a level 2. So I don't know where these numbers ever came from, but we've never hit this trigger in the city.
Ms. Gibson, if I may,
Yeah.
I would rely on your local river authority, and maybe they can have some equipment and come perform some testing to verify some of these numbers.
Okay, so number 1, the River Authority did meet our Public Works crew out at the Dallas Street well. Public Works crew tried to measure with their sonar radar, and it didn't work. So then the River Authority tried to measure it, and it didn't work. So, exactly. They part ways, and the River Authority decides, well, I'm going to go try my equipment on a different well, and sure enough, it worked.
Okay.
Their assessment is likely there was obstruction, and that's why they couldn't measure it.
It's like-
I don't know that the equipment's broken or
it's
not.
hard to tell.
I don't know what equipment is needed, really. So I really don't want to be arbitrarily making purchases when collectively we don't really know what we're doing. And I know I'm on a soapbox. I'll pause and let somebody else talk.
No.
But
I was going to say there's different methods for doing that, and there's like a bubble level.
It's like a pressure. You can do like
Yeah,
a
there's pressure, there's electronic, and then there's just manual,
There's multiple ways.
depending on the depth you're trying to detect.
well, because of the ambiguity of all of this and how these numbers don't really jive, and there's a city monitor well. It's a permanent well. It's in the Lower Trinity, like the majority of our 3 major wells are. So if we're going to use a well's depth, Let's use the one that's really professionally monitored.
Have you got that one up today? Cause I didn't look at that one this afternoon.
Yeah,
Where is
it's,
it? Was it 480 something?
I just wrote it down. 476.31.
So which one?
That's the monitor well, the city monitor well.
62, what's the number on it?
The permit number is 6924225.
And who monitors that?
This is
Great.
water data for Texas. It's at the River Authority, Texas Water Development Board groundwater database. But it's by the cemetery.
Mm-hmm.
So it's close, it's in close proximity to Mulberry well, right? Okay.
Yeah, it's over by my house.
Now, what I will
mean,
say
kind
too is that my thought was like, let's just get, until we can get some real experts and scientists and studies done to plug numbers in here, why can't we just say that our rule is, we're at whatever stage the River Authority Groundwater District is at, because we have to be anyway.
Right.
And then we just leave or maybe it's time to review and update our restrictions, but we can maintain our restrictions and not have to our only trigger would be they declared stage 1, so we're in stage 1. Our trigger and our so initiation
And that's what the county
and
does too,
termination.
because I called them, so they follow
Yeah.
the River Authority's plan
Yes.
also,
Who does?
the county.
Now
Oh, yeah, okay.
we do too,
Right.
but we
That's
have
nice.
additional restrictions in place, which is a good thing because the whole county doesn't have a public water supply system. We do, and we need to regulate that use in a different way than the rest of the county, where the majority of residents are on wells, or, you know, there are some, of course, subdivisions with water.
So could we maybe stand up a committee to work on this together, maybe with somebody from BGRAD and from the water?
Well, that was their recommendation as well.
Let's do it. I mean, I would definitely
Well-
say Rebecca should be on it.
No, I'm not saying the committee part. I'm
She's
telling
saying
you,
the
like,
adoption.
the recommendation of just matching their stage.
No, I am saying I would agree with that. If
Okay.
I were on the committee, I would agree with
I
that.
mean, for our restrictions.
But for our restrictions, because we need separate, city restrictions, but I would also I would recommend on the committee having somebody from BGRAD, somebody I know, or at least I know
Well, she is
was.
the big head. She's on
Right.
board.
Right, and, but
And Lydia.
somebody separate, if Rebecca
Yes.
wanted to be on the committee, but, and I don't have to be on the committee if Jerry or somebody else, but I would be fine being on the committee. But, we need to have a committee that could do this, so we're not dredging through a 2-hour workshop or something like that and have the committee come back and maybe have a workshop then.
The point in this tonight was to get to that point, Darcy, is for council to give us a consensus that, yes, we have to follow that grant.
Absolutely.
But
I
if
agree
we
with that.
want to make our own restrictions, we certainly can.
I agree.
So, let's get there. And I don't know who on the, yes, Rebecca.
I guess maybe I would ask that you check with Dan and ask him how we need to put the language in our ordinance so that our initiation and termination triggers are simply BCRAGD
Triggers.
declared 1, BCRAGD terminated stage 1.
Yeah.
And then we start the process of reviewing the stage. There, it's called section 1308.009, the drought response stages, which have our specific goals within the city, and water customers in the ETJ, I guess, would also have to follow this.
Yes.
Okay.
Jonathan,
Actually, I'll have to ask.
I'm sorry.
Because I think if they're on our water system, they should.
how
Yes,
were these
Jerry.
established, do you know,
I do not
How
know.
was it?
originally?
No, sir, I don't know.
This was 2000.
None of us were here in 2000, I don't
Okay.
know. I mean, I was here, but I
I
wasn't.
didn't know if maybe he
Yeah,
discovered
this is-
something in his
this is
Lynn
research.
would know.
new
Yes,
information to me.
Lynn Palmer.
I just gotta look into it.
I thought at one time the city, it's been a while back, monitored the usage of the water to a certain point, and if the customer went past that point, they were charged extra. Are we still doing that? I mean, in this drought? It started in the drought.
You bring up a good point. We did create a different type of fee schedule a few years back that reflected a savings for low water use. So we added in an additional tier. Like if your water level is between 0 and 1,500, that we didn't increase that rate and we kept it at a really low rate so that it's like the more water you use, the more you're gonna pay for your water.
Right, but I think if you're supposed to just use a certain amount and you went past that amount, it's to charge them a little bit more, you're charged a little bit more.
Like a penalty.
Yeah, and it encourages though, in the positive side, it encouraged people not to
exceed.
use that water. Just as, I remember that happening.
I don't know.
This particular plan in stage 5 calls for a 90% reduction in overall water use. And I really don't,
do that.
ma'am,
It's impossible. That's not possible.
I know.
I mean, I'm trying all kinds of things to reduce water in my
But-
household, but I'm not down 90%.
When your
It
business
also
is
allows for a city or
Reduce any.
police officer to arrest them and take them to court and fine them and blah, blah, blah.
This ordinance is.
Oh, we have to be
cuckoo.
creative.
This is an ordinance
We have to be
203.
creative.
Let's see.
So if
Who
you've
was
got
mayor in
water running out
2000?
on the street or water, you
Yeah.
know, and if we have not really been
Forced.
monitoring the bills so much to see
Right.
who's using too much,
Right, right.
but there is a provision for,
Yeah, I think there was a cap, if I remember correctly, only the last time the city went through this drill.
thank you,
Just to
Lynn.
encourage not to use past a certain amount.
Darcy?
Well, and that's something too. I'd like to see a couple of things maybe come out of this and it not just be penalizing, but, education. How do we save water? Because a lot of people, you say, save water, we all need to save water and don't water and don't this and that, don't water outside and stuff. So we have to educate our customers and our citizenry. But also on the committee, if we stand up a committee, I'd like to see a couple of citizens that aren't on council or aren't whatever. Lynn probably would be a great one. She was on council at the time. She can remember, why some
There you go.
why
See what you get for showing up?
why some
You don't
things
work.
were
It
done.
happens after a while.
But also I'd like to see, instead of penalizing people because of the kind of work that I do for a living, penalizing people don't always get the benefits that we think they will. Oftentimes rewarding people for doing what we want them to do instead of penalizing people for doing what we don't want them to do is a greater benefit. And I've brought up before that in situations like this, I know in my household we could probably pull our water records for the last 2 months. I know we've reduced our water usage. I could probably say we've reduced it by at least 30%. I can't say we've reduced it by 90, but we've reduced it at least by 30% and probably greater than that. There ought to be some type of benefit for that. Hey, great job. If it's something on your water bill, congratulations, you've reached this checkpoint. That stuff means something to people. It really does. Or hey, you got a 10% reduction on your water bill for conservation during a red flag drought. Something when like it triggers to a stage 5 or stage 4 and you reduce your water usage by 30%, you ought to get a 10% reduction. Something like that, rewarding people for doing things we want them to do instead of penalizing them for doing something we don't want them to do. I'd really like us, and not just us, but all of government, think that way instead of penalize people.
Excuse me,
Of course.
well, I'm not saying that Earl is running around writing tickets,
Sure.
but he is definitely on pool patrol because, the big thing is, well, he came out and checked the pool out at Pioneer and they had trucked in water and they had receipts. I saw the little tankers bringing it in, they wanted me to know that, they weren't filling the pool. I don't know of any other instances. I know he talked to Warrior's Heart, just, and not trying to enforce a law, but rather to say, hey, we're in a drought here, so.
But it's the way people perceive it. And so but that's also with education, because if you don't think that the Prophet and the Bulletin are going to publicize that, if that's not going to be on the front page, hey, the city of Bandera is gonna do a 10% reduction in your water bill if you do this, people are gonna respond to that positively rather than screw the city because they just want more money. You know, if we think about it that way, you know.
Bunch of morons.
Rebecca first and then William.
Sure.
Okay, so one thing that I want to suggest, and I do of course understand that this is a workshop and a non-voting item, but as it stands in the ordinance, it's the mayor who declares and initiates any drought, and in my opinion, we do not have any authority to be in stage 5 emergency water shortage conditions by our ordinance according to this triggering criteria. And my recommendation, and I hope you'll consider this, and I'm not asking you for an answer right now, is to simply roll back and we follow precisely the River Authority's plan. And those are the only restrictions in place within our jurisdiction are the river authorities. They are the most stringent regulations that are legally in place right now. And so I really think we need to remove our own enforcement of our own.
But she has the authority, she could do that without even going through council.
Exactly,
Right.
that's what I said.
And make it a big deal on resolution or amendment or
No,
whatever.
it's just a
Right,
declaration.
right, that's what I'm saying, it would
That's
avoid, it
exactly what
avoids all
I
that.
said.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Okay,
Are they
I'm
on
just
stage
agreeing
4,
with
Rebecca?
I'm agreeing with you, whether it sounds like it or not.
to me though, if you look at the very bottom of what the River Authority has put out there, if there are people filling their swimming pool, for instance, or people washing their sidewalks or washing their cars, then that violation is to be reported to the River Authority.
Yes.
So that takes,
It
Oh,
does, because
Right.
we have zero authority to enforce our own ordinance because we have not met that trigger.
right, I agree.
So the only restrictions that even can be in place right now are the river authorities. And I think we just need to
Go ahead.
follow
So it
theirs.
needs to be on the next agenda.
No, it doesn't. It means tomorrow morning in the
She
office
could.
or right now on her phone or however it's just.
I think you have to notify,
However
put
she
it in the
does it.
paper too, don't you? That we're
did it.
making the change?
No,
I thought I read that. Okay,
I
No.
don't think so.
I didn't read it like twice,
Stage
Oh.
5.
but I
Stage,
thought I saw
But it's
that.
different.
Maybe not.
It talks-
Declaration.
Regulate your house with water inside.
The mayor and his or her designee is hereby authorized and directed to implement the applicable provisions of this plan upon determination that such implementation is necessary to protect the public health, safety, and welfare. The mayor and his or her designee shall have the authority to initiate or terminate drought or other water supply emergency response measures as described in this plan. So
Good.
just like when the mayor said we were in stage 5, deleting it from the website and then communicating to the public that it's the river authority's rules presently that are
Well, we would-
enforceable.
we would still be in the River Authority stage 5,
Of course,
but again,
just
they're-
not the city's stage 5.
Right. We'll make that very clear. We'll get that done first thing in the morning. Because this has been really, when I went to stage 5, it was because the River Authority was in stage 5.
And I understand.
And
I
so
do.
but again, our restrictions are so different.
Yeah.
But similar at sometimes as well. So, all right.
And I wonder how many people even know that there's any type of restrictions right now. I saw a place where they were
think so.
power washing their house and they didn't have separate tanks, they were hooked up to the hose.
Some people
So-
literally do not care to follow
Yes.
restrictions. They say, I've read it on a few Facebook comments, you can't tell me what to do.
With my well.
Yeah, but I think
You
this
can't tell me
this
what to do
with
was
my
so
well,
blatant though,
We have had
in the open, that I
neighbors call
think they
and
wouldn't have been that
report
bold.
people.
Other neighbors,
And
yeah.
we send Earl out there, like people will call and say, my neighbor's watering their yard. And so
So, I mean-
if they're reported to the city,
Well-
we are sending out enforcement.
Lynn?
this is more of a, like, being a little more comical about it, but I'm sure y'all know what a military shower is.
Oh, yeah.
And so that would be a way to educate the people about.
Oh, yeah.
Well, we could do it funny too. I mean, you could do a funny meme.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, I mean, if it gets that bad, I mean, it may come to that point where you
Yes,
turn
of
the
course.
water off, turn it back on to rinse on,
I do that out at the park, just for fun.
I'm like, we don't need to
I
know,
wouldn't
Jerry.
wanna have to live that way, but if it
Yeah.
comes to that,
Julian, you wanted to say?
Yes, ma'am, and looking at the bigger picture of this, does the city participate in PACE Texas? So we really ought to look at that.
What's it called?
PACE Texas, so what it is, it incentivizes people to, they come in and can do an audit for your house. They'll go through and show where you're losing water, leaks, low efficiency toilets, sinks, counters, not counters, I'm sorry, but all the faucets and stuff, catching rainwater, and then they, on top of that, they work with banks and will give you almost low interest or no interest loans to be able to implement that stuff.
Wow.
Yeah, we need to.
And all we have to do
Publish it.
is pass it by ordinance that we accept it, and it's, I know we're in the ACOG range, so.
That's awesome.
I'll bring,
That's an ACOG program.
right, well, no, it's actually a state program,
Okay.
but ACOG would be our authority, and I'm gonna be there Monday or Tuesday, so I'll grab as much literature as I can
Great.
and bring it back.
And
Thank
BEC will do the same thing, like for your electricity.
Yes,
like
but they do
farm
electricity as
service.
well, because they, LED lights, and they'll come through and do an audit.
Yeah.
They really kind of target businesses, but they will do residential as well.
Nice.
Same with BEC.
Rebecca?
Yes, so it's a little bit concerning to me, especially moving here forward, that any city official would be trying to enforce any restrictions.
Educate,
absolutely.
don't
Right.
enforce.
So I don't see a problem going out and visiting, and I'm not trying to make the policy for the law enforcement. I'm just saying, we don't have, our triggers
The
are not met.
authority.
We don't have authority to impose city restrictions. I think communicating, like, hey, these are the river authority's restrictions, look at their fines, I don't wanna call them, right? Could be helpful,
Well,
and I
that's-
love education campaigns too. I just learned last week, at the wastewater treatment plant that, 7 AM to 9 PM and, no, sorry, 7 AM to 9 AM and 7 PM to 9 PM are the high velocity times, and to help people to lay off their flushing and their faucets and showers during that time frame, because there are people who only have that time frame to use, but a lot of us can work outside of those times, and that helps
Laundry
the
and
city
all
a
that.
lot.
That's
number one,
I don't
but
mean
hang
to be
out.
talking so much tonight, but I was outside, everybody knows where Rose's is, and she was watering a tree. And a city official, or not, a city worker, came up very politely, leaned over to us and said, we're in 5-1, stage 5 water restrictions. You need to turn that water off, and she was immediately like, oh, I forgot. So they are going around just
Being
doing
nice.
those
Well,
kinds
that's
of
good.
Yeah, we
stuff.
haven't
That's
written
good.
any tickets, they're just going out and talking to is
Yeah.
what.
Well, even
Nice.
saying city restrictions,
Yeah.
I wouldn't.
Well, we can change the way
But
it's
I
marked.
like that
Cool.
we're going out.
Yeah,
So.
I do too.
Swiss
All right,
really
anything
educate,
else, any
educate.
comments, anything going on? Anybody wanna make a motion? Jerry,
There it is.
I move to adjourn this meeting.
Rebecca, Christine,
Come on, man.
Yeah, let Christine say something.
discussion, all in favor? All in favor?